your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. From Answer Media, this is the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I'm nervous for this episode, Callie. It's going to be a really important episode, but it's going to be hard for me, but I'm going to do it because it's important. And also, it's not that terribly hard, so it's not, I don't know what I'm saying. Let's just get to it.
Fair enough. Well, we're obviously no stranger to serious conversations on the show. We talk a lot about a lot of really heavy subjects and some things that aren't too happy about the world. And obviously we try and balance that out with humor. We have good news episodes sometimes. But at the end of the day, what we're interested in talking about is what's real, as it pertains to the LGBT community, as it pertains to the atheist community. One of those subjects that we have yet to tackle on the show in a deliberate and concerted way is the idea of abuse, of emotional and physical and psychological abuse. And our dear friend, Alisha, has offered to tell us her story and tell us her experience and the things that she learned and what she's been through in this experience. And in hopes that we might reach some folks who maybe are in the same position and don't know how to deal with it and don't know how to get out, or people who have been there and maybe could use some perspective sorting through their own feelings and experiences. So very heavy content note. The rest of this episode is going to have some
This entire episode is one giant trigger warning.
Yeah.
One giant trigger warning.
Pretty much. So Alisha, welcome to the show.
Hi.
I love you a lot, and I'm sad that the first time you've come on the show is to talk about a very unhappy subject, but we definitely appreciate you coming on. What I'm going to do is just kind of hand the mic, so to speak, to you, and just tell us your story. So starting with, I guess, where you and your ex met.
My ex and I met when we were both training in the military. He joined my company for AIT. I was training to be a medic. He just happened to sit next to me, and he seemed very charming and engaging and intelligent, and he seemed like he had it all together, and that he just sort of, knew what he wanted to do and was going after it. And I've always been somebody who was sort of, I appreciated drive, and I found his confidence very attractive. And so shortly thereafter, we started dating. And dating in the military is a completely different animal than, dating outside of the military.
How so?
Because you are literally spending from, before dawn hours until 9 o'clock at night training together in extremely stressful situations and, mimicking what you could see in war. And so when you're put under that kind of stress, I like to say that I was squeezed, and I didn't exactly like all of the stuff that came out, especially in basic training. That was a bit of a different story in individual training, but, not really too different. We were learning how to save lives. So we had to imagine people dying and what we were going to be going through. So I think it created a situation where we felt like a deeper connection because of what we were going through than what we actually had.
Right. So, and that's kind of the idea of that kind of training together, right? It's like you share this experience, you share this hardship, and that creates a level of camaraderie.
I imagine it's like a summer camp crush times 1,000.
Oh, yeah. It's extremely taxing, and that's why they call each other brothers and sisters in arms, because you get very, very close to the people that you are going to eventually depend on to save your life. And so you have to be tight, you have to be close. But it sets up a situation where a lot of people actually, they called it AIT love. Everybody seems to find somebody to fall in love with and all of that. And I happen to be one of those people. I thought I had something different. And this is very important to remember. It seemed like the greatest thing that had ever happened. This was a romance fairy tale. You felt like you struck it you found that, struck it rich, you found that needle in the haystack, and you were so engaged and all this other stuff. And in fact, we met on April 28th of 2007. We were engaged June 21st, 2007. We were married August 16th, 2007.
So this was moving very quickly.
And that's very important to remember when we go back and talk about the timeline of this relationship. It is an intentional part of the type of abuse that I endured to move along quickly. And so in November,
was he pressuring you into committing sooner than you wanted to? Or you were going along with it as well? That's what you wanted?
I was going along with it because I thought that this was it. This was, he was amazing. And he was it. I'm not even going to lie. Like, in the very beginning, it was amazing. He was engaged. He wrote me poetry. He called me every day. We trained together. We ate together. We spent all of our time together. And in no way was he ever pushy or aggressive. He was protective. It's actually my fault. I ran into somebody else and he didn't see it and he thought that they had run into me, and he almost attacked the guy because he thought that person had attacked me. So, coming from a childhood that I had where my father was also, I would say, at least narcissistic, but he was mostly absent and used me to get women. And so, to have somebody this man standing before me, treating me like gold, like something precious, it was extremely enticing. In November, he had to do his training a little bit longer than me. And so there was a time that we were apart, and he was still extremely engaged and all of that. And then in November of 2007, we got our first duty station and we moved out to Seattle. And immediately, things were different. It was that quick. The first thing that I noticed was that he would not do anything. I was his mother, basically. I did all of the housework. I did all of the finance work. I had 2 jobs because I was a reservist. So I also had a full-time job working at a hospital. And he sat around and played video games. That's all he did. He tried to explain to me that his job was harder because he was the only one that was active duty. His sergeant didn't like him, and he blamed this all on her. And that should have been a sign to me that things were going to go bad. But he blamed everything that ever went wrong in his life on her. He got to the point where he was already beginning to risk our income by smoking pot, which I think times are changing now. But then in the military, if you popped hot, you could be discharged.
Popped hot being military slang for failing a drug test, right?
Thank you. Yes.
No worries.
Sometimes I forget the lingo. Yes.
Right.
It was like he had this false sense of security that he would either never be picked or he would pass. I very quickly got sick of this because there were times when he didn't come home. He was disrespectful, antagonistic, and aggressive, and he seemed to enjoy it. I remember very clearly the first time that he was able to push me over my edge, where I'm the one now screaming and I'm on my toes and I'm so angry because I don't know why this person is just pushing all of my buttons and why are you treating them this way? And a flash of entertainment went through his eyes. To enjoy getting me to the point where I would melt down.
It makes them feel powerful. It makes them feel like they're in control, and they're the ones who are on top. If they can get you to break, then there's nothing you can do about them anymore, because now they're the strong one and they can tell you how you're weak.
Right. Absolutely. So it's kind of a victory to them. So they in a sense they're that shows them they're winning. Yeah. No. I was a pretty independent woman before this. I had already gotten 1.5 college degrees before I decided to join the military. I had specific plans for what I was going to do with my career in the military. I was going to pay off my student loans, and then I was either going to join the physician's assistance program in the military and make a career out of it, which I was leaning towards. I must be insane. I actually really liked my job in the military, actually. Yeah. Or I was going to go back and finish my second degree, which was sports medicine. Medicine has always been something that
I can look at a car, I can look at the body and it makes sense to me the way that a car makes sense to a mechanic. And so that was always a love of mine. And that's what I wanted to do. And narcissists are attracted to those people because they feel like they can be a springboard to getting their own accolades. I had not yet lost my sense of autonomy, so I was ready to leave. I was already fed up, probably spring of the next year. And I made my first attempt to leave, but I was convinced to stay. There was the first instance of sort of physical abuse. It was more a physical intimidation, but he cornered me in our bedroom and stood in front of me, had me in a corner, and was berating me. And that was terrifying. And so I pushed him with my hands in the face to get free, because I literally felt like an animal in a corner.
Yeah.
And I just had a flight response. Sure. And to this day, he says that I hit him in the face, that I instigated all future abuse because I hit him that day.
Wow.
So I was going to leave, but his family convinced me to stay. And so we went to counseling instead. We saw a counselor I was religious at the time. I think I was probably left of center moderate, and he was right of center moderate, but we weren't that far apart. The church had a counselor, like an actual dude that actually went to school and actually had a degree and actually was educated. And he was good. He was good, but he didn't listen.
You said that when you moved in together that things were immediately different. Like it was like flipping a switch.
Light switch.
And I'm curious, to me, that sounds like the wooing and how amazing things were before that. I mean, was that him like acting to like win the prize, and then once he's won the prize, like getting you to move in with him? I mean, is that just like, okay, I've got her now, so I don't need to act anymore?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The idolization stage starts first. And so the shorter that the narcissist can get you through the idolization stage, the less work they have to put in until you commit. Once you commit, game over, they won.
It's a technique called love bombing. It's where they shower you in praise and adoration and make you feel so special and loved. And this, emotional abusers do it. Sexual abusers do it to their victims. Cults do it to their members all the time. The cult wants you to stay in and be part of their group. So they want you to feel like they have something that you can't get from any other organization or from your family. So you feel like you have to stay there for your emotional security.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's why I stayed, because I was also convinced that this was sort of temporary, that he was just in a really bad unit. And if we could get him to a different unit with better leadership, that it wouldn't be so bad. So, we then,
can we talk about that for just a second? Because I guess I should say probably almost everyone knows someone who's been through a situation like this. Not everyone knows that they know someone, I'll put it that way. But someone who's never really had any kind of exposure to this, I think this is something that is commonly misunderstood. Obviously, the refrain is like, oh, he treats you badly. Of course you should leave. And if you don't, then it somehow becomes your fault, right?
Right.
And I have to imagine that in some circumstances, looking at it in hindsight, like there might even be a bit of yourself that feels that way, even though, I mean, knowing what we know, that's obviously not the case. That's not how it works. But can you sort of help us understand that dynamic, how it's different when you're actually there in the situation in the moment?
Well, I think there are two things at play. There is intermittent reinforcement, which is, think of the bait on the hook. Mm-hmm. You're constantly reeling it in a little bit away, but that fish will always chase it because it's hungry. I was in a situation where I wanted this man to love me. I loved him. And so I wanted him to love me again the way that he did before. It's hard to explain, but I liken it to the way that a child just really wants their parents to love them.
Yeah, and so you sort of you're able to sort of compartmentalize and dismiss the bad things because
you easily forget them because you want this so bad. Like the other thing that is in play is that a narcissist intentionally targets empathetic people because they can play on that to establish a traumatic bonding cycle. that makes it harder for them to leave. And they also target people who have weaknesses. So my weakness was that I had, a distant and abusive father, and I wanted somebody in that place in my life that would love me the way that I felt like I wanted to be loved, not necessarily deserved, because I also had self-esteem issues. Mm-hmm. And he definitely used that, playing on you can't get any better than me. And when you get those messages, even at the beginning, they're really subversive. They're hints. They're just little tweaks to your psyche, not the punches that come later, to just keep you kind of off balance so that you can always be manipulated. And so in that situation, I'm thinking, I love him. I want him to love me. I'm being empathetic. It's really tough to be in a situation with difficult leadership where you have no control. So he's probably acting out like I am justifying his behavior,
right?
Because I'm an empathetic person.
And I think a thing to point out is that on a spectrum, obviously, but almost everyone who has even the least bit of empathy does this. Mm-hmm. I think we tend to have sort of this dichotomous thing, like this is an abusive relationship and this is not an abusive relationship. So I think almost everyone has been in a bad relationship and has stayed despite they all say I should have known better. You know what I mean? But you can't when you're in the moment, right? And I think a lot of people will make this distinction I should have known it was bad just because we argued a lot. But there was no abuse. We just didn't get along, But
they're not taking into consideration the incremental steps that it took to get there.
Exactly.
Some of them are so incremental you didn't even know they happened.
Because I even think about this in the bad relationship that I was in, where there was some emotional abuse, but it's thankfully not something that I carry, long-term trauma from. But, it's one of those things. I look back on it and I think, what the hell was I thinking? I should have seen this while it was happening, but I didn't because I didn't want to. And
didn't want to, and it was intentionally designed to go past you.
Just to sort of bring it full circle for folks who might not necessarily have that kind of insight into that kind of experience. It's everyone, I feel has been in some position. They're like, shit, I should have known better, or mm-hmm. I should have seen this when I was in it, but it took hindsight for me to get it. And
hindsight or external vision.
Right.
And I had, when I finally opened up to my best friends and told them everything, all of the things that I was hiding, because the other thing to add on, a lot of people don't know, that they either knew or probably know somebody who's going through this and hiding it.
Oh, it's shockingly common. And that's why I pointed out, I was about to say, well, someone who doesn't know anyone who's been through this, but I feel like almost everyone does, even if they don't know it.
They just don't know it.
Yeah. So I felt like that was an important distinction to make.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately very, very common.
Right.
And probably another podcast that I can come on and talk. I think it has a lot to do with toxic masculinity.
Ho
Yes.
ho.
And so eventually you get pregnant.
I was expecting our first child in September 2008. That pregnancy nearly killed me. I love him now. I'll keep him. He's very cute, smarter than me.
Right.
But he did try to kill me. I had extreme hyperemesis. I lost 25 pounds in the first 5 weeks after the hormones and stuff take place.
And what's hyperemesis?
Mostly, it didn't matter what I put in my body, I threw it back up.
I gotcha. Okay.
So over emesis, vomiting. I was already in the military. So I was 165. I'm 6 feet tall for people who don't know me. I was 165 pounds and I lost 25. And it had nothing to do with anything other than, my body just didn't know what to do with being pregnant. I got to the point at about 10 or 11 weeks where I was down 25 pounds and I was malnourished and dehydrated. And I fainted in my hallway. And he left me there. I came to on my own. I don't think I was out that long. And I had asked him to take me to the emergency room, and he refused. He told me that I was awake now, so it must not be that big of a deal. And he was going back to sleep. So I crawled to my car. I drove myself to the emergency room. I crawled into the emergency room, across the parking lot and into the doors on my hands and knees, and ended up getting 2, we call them banana bags. They're the 1,000 cc's of lactated ringers with all of your electrolytes and sugars and salts and stuff like that, plus water. I had 2 of them before I passed the pinch test on the back of your hands where your skin doesn't just stay raised.
Right.
I was severely dehydrated. That was like the first feeling of actual neglect that I felt. Like, but it's not just me here that you're refusing to help. You're refusing to help your child that can't help itself. And I can't help it. I shouldn't be helping it. I should be in the car trying not to pass out again. This is also around the second instance of physical abuse. This is actual hitting. So if you're here and you have trouble with this is probably where a lot of the really rough stuff starts. So just beware. He did not like what I had to say. He did not like the words that I used. So he picked up a leather couch pillow and smacked me across the face with it. If anybody's ever been hit with a leather anything, it kind of hurts.
Yeah.
And all because he just didn't like what I said. I mean, I was in the military, so I was trained in combatives. I've never been a girl to shy down from competition, so I got up and I started hitting him back with it and told him, don't you ever hit me with this pillow again. And pregnant, he actually kicked me in the pelvis to get me away from him while I was pregnant with this child. And to this day, he says that he was just defending himself, that he never intended to hurt or hit me.
Wow.
And once again, when you're in the situation and you want to assume the best of somebody and you want to empathize, so I am standing over him. I am smacking him with a hard pillow. I am screaming at him. I am also pregnant and malnourished and dehydrated. Do you think that it requires kicking your pregnant wife in the stomach to get her off of you?
Well, right. I mean, after picking up the pillow and hitting you first. Like,
right.
You were obviously not the aggressor in this situation.
And the reason that I chose this story of all of them was because it demonstrates for me one of the things that became a trend in our marriage was the refusal to complete the regress. He would only, like if you're saying, well, I did this because you did this. Well, I did this because you did this. We always stopped at the part where it became my fault.
Right.
Because accepting responsibility is not in a narcissist's wheelhouse.
Right.
They can't do it because it involves discomfort, accepting that you're wrong, accepting responsibility, and accepting a consequence. I have trouble understanding that because I don't really find being wrong or having a consequence to be that big of a deal, especially if I've earned it. It was so frustrating because it felt like, I remember one time he said to me, no matter what I do, you should be in control of yourself. And I immediately realized that only goes one way.
Right.
Because you can completely lose your marbles over me, and that is still my fault.
I have a problem with him implying that whenever these things happen that he's not in control of himself. I think there are maybe some times legitimately where somebody reaches a certain point and they're sort of genuinely not in control of their own actions, but
it shouldn't be a regular occurrence.
Exactly. And especially in situations like these, I really don't think that a person who does this is as not in control of themselves as they claim to be. I don't buy that.
Based on what I've seen, that flicker of entertainment, of excitement, of enjoyment when he pushed me over the edge, I don't think that a narcissist suffers as much as we want to believe that they do. I know a lot of old thought. There's new current thought that agrees with that, what I saw. But old thought was always that they were this small, like weak inside that they protected with all these defense mechanisms, like an iron dome.
And I'm sure a person in that situation, there may be times where they feel regret or they feel bad or anything like that. But like, if it's not to the point where they stop doing it, I don't really care.
Right.
Like, it's not really a relevant thing. Like the fact that you sometimes feel guilty. Yeah.
Like an apology with no actual change in action is just a bunch of shell words. Like
exactly.
It's just words,
yeah. It's meaningless.
And it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. So yeah. I stayed. I mean, I was pregnant. I was no longer working. I was financially dependent on him, and I was sick. So I stayed. And I think this started sort of the trend of like, well, I've stayed this far. And yes, now I'm starting, and you can kind of see the wheel of abuse start to turn. So we moved to California, Monterey, California. I thought these orders were a joke, actually. Sure, the Army's sending me to paradise. That doesn't seem right.
Right.
But we did. We had a beautiful house. My first child was born, and he was perfect. And I don't know. I think I still had this hope that now that this child was here, that he would grow up, that he would, he'd snap out of it and he would snap into it. That didn't actually happen. Even on the way there was actually another instance of abuse. We were driving, and I had a migraine. I only had two of them, and one of them was while driving to California. And he insisted that I drive because he was too tired. And so I was fine with it as long as we didn't, play the stereo. Because anybody who's had a migraine knows that feels like, just all of the needles in your eardrums and in your brain at the same time when you have migraine. But he wouldn't leave it off. And so I'm sitting here playing with a child on like turning it on, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off. It's like, I thought you were tired. Go to sleep. He would not leave it off. So I started to drive with my left hand, and I covered the button with my right hand. And this man hit me in the face while going down the highway at 75 miles an hour to knock my glasses off my face so that I would move my hand and he could turn the stereo on. I swerved. This was the straightaway from on the west side of Salt Lake City. And we were on the lake. So if anybody's ever been there, there's no ditch to speak of. It's road, minuscule curb, Salt Lake. And I swerved. I almost put us in the lake. And so I pulled over and slammed on the brakes and just screamed at him because, for me, this child is inside me. I feel that responsibility. I can see my belly now. I think I was about 6 months pregnant. And so I know, I'm feeling the weight of this responsibility already. And this dude hit me in the face while I was driving, while I was pregnant with this child. And I didn't know what to do. So I just kept driving. And we got there, and it just seemed like, he just sort of snapped out of it, and everything was right as rain when we got there. It was so weird. Like, he gave me lip service later about being sorry about that, but it was still hollow. It didn't seem to ring true that he actually understands that he nearly killed us that day. We made it there. Our first child was born. It was an amazing experience to do that. And he was there. And it felt for a moment like that man that I thought that I had married. And so I forgot, just like you do. It wasn't long before he switched that light back off. He would not lift a finger to help with his child. I can count on one hand the amount of diapers that he changed. He cooked a meal once. He never cleaned anything. He complained about work. He said he was too tired to get up in the middle of the night to help me. He said that I was better at it and better suited for it. That this was the agreement, that I was going to be the stay-at-home mom and he was going to work outside the house. All these excuses to not have to ever do anything he doesn't actually want to do. I was convinced that I was doing something good, that I was helping him pass this training. I mean, it was a rigorous training. I will give him that. He was learning Chinese at an accelerated rate for the military. No small feat. And he passed top of his class and did a bunch of other really good things there. But it was all on my back because he wouldn't have been able to do any of it if I hadn't literally managed everything else at home, including the children. And so just didn't know that that would be a trend that would continue for the duration of the marriage. Shortly thereafter, we had another incident with the couch pillows, which found their way in the trash after this incident. Once again, he didn't like what he said, so I think the baby was 9 months old. And he hit me in the face with the same leather couch pillow again, and this time the zipper cut my cheek. And so, like an idiot, because I don't know, I stood up and I started to hit him again with the pillow, yelling at him, "Don't hit me with this pillow. You don't have the right to smack me in the face every time you just don't like what I say." And once again, he kicked me down into the entertainment center, but I tripped. I tripped over the coffee table, and I landed into the entertainment center. I scraped my back from the small of my back to the nape of my neck. Scraped and bruised black. And I nearly brought the TV down on top of me. And then he just stood over me and just didn't say anything. Didn't really have anything to say. I was bruising immediately. And they just asked him to get away from me and leave me alone. And he kept apologizing, but it just didn't feel, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. Like, wasn't really sorry. Like, he was only sorry because I was still hurt. But that...
Right. And just something like, well, you're just supposed to say that. It's not that there's supposed to be any feeling or responsibility attached to it. Like, that's just a word that's supposed to come out of your mouth when something like that happens.
Exactly. Like, he wasn't actually saying anything that mattered. Like, oh my God, I should not have done that. That was wrong. It was just like, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Are you going to get up? Do you need help? Like, cold. It was very cold.
Right.
The only good thing that came out of that situation was I was bruised so badly that despite perfect Monterey weather, I had to wear long sleeve shirts and had to wear my hair down. And those bruises lasted for 4 weeks. And he quickly realized that he couldn't maintain this image, because narcissists, they're very concerned about their image. They're very concerned about what they look like. So they're always striving to keep up with whichever Jones they think is better than them. And for him, that was the perfect father, perfect husband, perfect Christian routine. And he cannot maintain any one of those things if his wife is walking around with cuts and bruises over half of her back. So he did not put his hands on me after that. But he found other ways. Getting hit by your spouse isn't exactly the sexiest thing on the planet.
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean to laugh. I just kind of deal with a lot of this with humor. Sure. Because it's the only way for me to make it hurt less.
Yeah.
But sex fell off. I was still in pain from a complication from the episiotomy. I was exhausted from being the primary adult and parent in our home. I was a parent to a newborn, and I was a parent to a grown man-child. He was always drinking. Whether he was home or not, he was drinking. And I started just to lose respect for him, let alone, loving feelings or anything like that. And as soon as the sex started to fall off, he responded with even more aggression and antagonism, demands and disrespect, and convinced me that this was because we were not connecting anymore, and that for him, the only real way to do that was with sex. And unfortunately, we were religious, and religion buttresses this belief, with their beliefs around women should be giving their body up whenever, he asked for it, because men are too depraved to control themselves, and so they pass the emotional burden of managing his emotions to her. And because I believed in that religion, I believed that as well. And so I was roped back in to believing that it was my fault because I had been neglecting him and leaving him to be vulnerable to the world. So he asked me to make sure that I laid down every 3 to 4 days. And I did. I agreed. Because to me, it was a payoff. Like, if that's what it takes for this man to love me and to be kind to me and just to treat me with a basic sense of human decency, then I can do that. It was painful. I didn't enjoy it. And I did it for a year. This whole time, he was promising that he'll be kinder if I do this. And then when we get out of this really difficult training, and it was a really difficult training, that on the other side, he would have more time to help and to spend time with us as a family and to show the kind of love and appreciation that I needed. Like, I hung my hope on that. I accepted that promise, and I hung my hope on that. I did demand anyway that we go to counseling, and we were able to get it through the military because, you know, whether or not you're going through these things, just being a spouse of somebody who deploys is a really difficult thing.
Sure.
So we went to counseling, and he hated her because she called him on his behavior. He stopped going because he felt that she targeted him and didn't call me on any of the things that I was allegedly doing. And I remember it much differently. Like, I remember her just being very clear about how he was shifting the responsibility to me that wasn't my responsibility, and wouldn't let him blame shift me or blame me for things that were his responsibility. But she was still very, very clear to me about, about some of the things that I need to do. So I'm not saying I was perfect. I reacted. I was reactive, and he fed off of that. He was not targeted. It's just that he legitimately had more things that were damaging to the relationship than I did. And she saw that. So he quit going. So in 2010, we moved to Texas. This was supposed to be, the time. We were moving on to an easier training where he would have more time and have more attention. And that just did not come to pass. His drinking increased. His emotional abuse increased. His disrespect increased. He still refused to spend time with his kid or me. He still refused to help around the house. He still refused to help with the kids. Claimed that this training was really much harder than he expected because he wasn't anticipating having to be in charge of somebody. But after this training, when he gets into his actual, operant job in the real military, he promised it was going to be easier. In the meantime, I'm picking him up from hotel. I picked him up from a hotel, drunk. There were times where he went out boozing with his friends and didn't come home. And he would take the car. We only had one car at the time, and leave me alone with our child without a car or any way to get anywhere. If there was an emergency situation, I hid the keys to the car so that he couldn't take it, and would force him to walk to his friend's house, which wasn't really that far. It was Texas, so it was hot, but it wasn't far. And he called me literally every name in the book in front of our 18-month-old son. See you next Tuesday, B word, all of it. I made my second attempt at this time to leave. I had my bags packed, and I don't know why, but his parents called, and they just out of the blue, and they convinced me to stay. Or I called them. I can't remember. It was really, really stressful. Either I called them or they called me, but either way, I had a conversation with his father, and he convinced me that he was going to step in, and he was going to help, and he was going to set him straight and get him on a path where he needed to be in order to be a decent man.
So the dad, as you're talking, kind of, I guess, middlingly acknowledges that his son is messing up, and like, I'm going to try and make him better. And so that's what convinced you.
Right. I felt like I was supported.
Right.
And, that, they saw some of what was going on, because up until this point in all of our counseling, he begged me not to talk about physical abuse because it would be embarrassing. Course. Because it would be embarrassing, and he was sorry, and he wasn't going to do it again, and he understands why it's wrong. And this was when I decided to break that rule. So I told his parents, and I told our next counselor. But he decided that secular therapists were insufficient because they weren't Christians and they weren't catering to the needs of our soul. If you see my face right now, my eyes are crossed.
Right.
So we saw his pastor, our pastor. I was still going to church at the time. The pastor actually did chastise him for hiding things because he said something very clear, like, you can't fix what's hidden. But he was furious. He was absolutely furious that I would dare talk about something so embarrassing. Because remember, when we're talking about narcissists, we are talking about somebody who meticulously likes to maintain their image.
Right.
It's all about being the best and looking, not really being it, actually, looking like you're the best.
Right.
I quit that sex schedule thing because it didn't improve anything.
Sure.
It didn't improve anything. So I wasn't going to sit there and keep going through literally physical pain that I didn't even want to do, that wasn't even enjoyable for somebody that was not living up to their expectations.
Yeah, I think another theme that I see here, and I have a feeling this is a thing that probably happens a lot in these situations, is the idea that that you're sort of being led by the hope that, like, once we get to this specific point in time, then all of this is going to stop because we'll be in a better place. And I feel like that's probably a very powerful tool in convincing someone to stay as well, because you're stacking on top of the person that the fact that this person is predisposed to empathy. So when something like this happens, you're immediately saying, like, oh gosh, well, yeah, he's under a lot of stress. And, there was this one time where I didn't sweep the floor well enough, and, like, so on and so forth. And then he comes to you and says, like, well, this situation is temporary. When we do this thing at this point in the future, things are going to get so much better. And I feel like that's even yet one more tool that can keep somebody, because, again, on top of being empathetic and wanting to give this person the benefit of the doubt and wanting to be loved and not wanting to recognize that this is a bad situation, like, it's a really
and
powerful,
loving them.
Yeah,
you still love them.
Yeah, and that all is a very, very powerful cocktail. But I that was a thing that I actually hadn't articulated. As many of these kinds of stories as I've heard and talked with people about, that's not a thing that I had really thought about until now. That sort of, like, obviously it's very common that somebody says, like, oh, I'm really sorry, I won't do it again. But and I'm sure this situation is common too, but that's the first time that I've noticed
common.
that the first time that I've really noticed that idea of using the hope of the future as sort of a weapon of saying, like, well, yeah, this is all happening because of this thing that's happening right now, but this is temporary. So
think about the current situation of our presidency. There are two very common things that he uses to gain support: fear and hope. And that's the same thing that all narcissists use: fear and hope. And that's exactly where I was. Fear of being alone, fear of not being able, fear, I'm convinced that I can't do any better. So fear of, downward spiral from here, or not being able to make it without him, and hope that it's going to get better. So yeah, that's exactly what I had hope now. I had even more hope than I did before, because this, like you said, this is temporary. And I have support now. So I have his parents' support. So we moved to Vermont because he's going to be deploying soon. And now I'm pregnant with our second son. He ended up actually getting hurt in training. And so he came back. And at this point, I was at the very, very beginning stages of my deconversion. I was becoming an atheist. This is the very spot in my timeline where I was noticing that the church's assault, the outward assault on equal marriage, was disheartening to me, because I was actually part of the LGBTQ alliance. I think it was just the LGBT alliance when I was in college, and I had gay friends, and I had no reason to believe under a legal, maybe under a religious, not force marriages or churches to accept those sorts of unions, but there was no legal reason to deny it. So I was already there at the beginning of all this in like 2010. And it really forced me to reevaluate my beliefs, because this was not something that I believed. And the messages that were coming through seemed like they just did not mesh with what my internal morality. And so it caused me a bit of a crisis of faith. I stopped going to his church anyway because I found them unwelcoming and unaccepting. His home church was very strict, and the pastor seemed like he controlled everybody. And so I just didn't want, I've never liked that kind of thing. I didn't want to be a part of that thing. But his dad actually took that as a personal affront that I would reject his church. And it was a really poor relationship, and I stopped going to his house altogether because the type of person that I am, like, if you don't want to be around me, I'm not going to put myself in your face. I'm just going to relieve you of that pressure, and I'm just not going to come around. And so I stopped going to his house, and eventually we had a blow up that reset our relationship because I have a habit of standing up for myself. And so that helped, but we got a little bit closer, but it still was never quite amicable. And then in 2011, I actually had 2 deaths. In the span of just a few weeks, I actually suffered a miscarriage at 8 weeks. And my grandfather died. This was the grandpa he was my beloved grandpa, my favorite grandpa. And he died suddenly. And I was in Vermont and he was in Iowa. And I'm still like recovering from my miscarriage. And I remember I dropped the phone and I went running to the one person who was supposed to be there for me. And he just turns around in his chair and looks at me and says, "Well, he's dead. What do you want me to do about it? What do you want me to do about it?" And I just remember being so shocked. What would you want me to do about it if this were your father or your grandfather? Like, it should be obvious. To me, it was like, I thought this was like a standard thing. Like, people know what to do when somebody says that somebody they love died, right? He just had nothing. I had to deal with that by myself because he just could not figure out how to be supportive. And that hurt, that hurt pretty deep. I think, I'm not sure if it was that or just still not being able to make this marriage work, but we decided to see his home pastor for counseling. The same pastor that I just told you I was not a fan of. We were now going to go to counseling because in my mind, if he could understand what I was going through, this was a person that my husband trusted. If I could get him to see what I was going through, then hopefully we could have a breakthrough and we could make this work. I didn't quite yet understand the beast of narcissism that I was dealing with, but that was my hope. Instead, I think because this person grew up with my ex and had a, fairy tale view of him, he knew him as a child and stuff, that he turned on me and accused me of having a victim mentality and refused to address the fact that my husband was aggressive, disrespectful, and antagonistic, and blamed me for things that were no way my fault. He claimed that he was addressing his faults in private. But looking back, I'm not actually confident that actually occurred because nothing changed. We're still in the same pattern of him not lifting a finger, of not helping, not being supportive, not doing anything with his kids. This whole still cycle that we started with of everything being my fault and everything being my responsibility. That was the time that I stopped going because I wasn't going to let somebody tell me that I was being a victim or I had a victim mentality when I felt like I had reasonable grievances about this relationship. Shortly thereafter, we moved to Maryland. I was again 6 months pregnant with our second son. As usual, I coordinated everything and executed all the steps. I filled out all the paperwork to get him hired where he started working in Maryland. I hired the movers. I packed everything. I filled out all the forms. I broke the current lease. All he had to do was interview for the job and find a place to rent. So we get down there. We now have a stable income. He has predictable hours. So this is where we meant to be, right? This is what he promised.
Right.
You've made it. You've arrived.
We've arrived.
Yeah, all of the stressful training and all of those temporary situations have expired.
So we're now here. And to me, I was like, okay, this is good because it's just in time for me to have our second kid in November of that year, and we should be able to make this work. Except it didn't, because he still came up with every excuse about why he did not have to help. Mostly because he was exhausted. He's learning this new job and it's so stressful, and his boss requires so much of him, and mentally he just doesn't have it. And then he decides like he can do better than this job. So he goes and gets a different job, and now we're in the same routine of this job is really hard. I've got so much to learn and it's so exhausting, and my boss is so demanding. And besides, don't you have all the time in the world to nap? What are you doing? You're just home. You have all day to work and get your stuff done and then sleep if you want to. And I think at this point I was just kind of getting to the point where I didn't even want to deal with it anymore. I did not, specifically him, I didn't want to deal with him. I didn't want to have to fight for it anymore. So it was one of those like, whatever, I'll just do it. And that's the goal, because now you're breaking. You're not fighting back anymore. And that's the goal, because it's less stress for them if you just comply. And that's what I did. And then he decides, because we have to do always catching up with Jones, he wants an MBA. All right. What's the benefits of getting an MBA? And he laid it all out for me. Like, all right, if this is what you want to do and you think that this is going to put us in a better situation, then all right, let's do it. So he gets into Johns Hopkins, actually. He got into a really prestigious program in Baltimore, and he is smart. He's brilliant. Most narcissists are. And once again, I filled out all of the FAFSA forms, and I filled out all of the application forms and hired the movers and packed everything up, and we moved to Baltimore. I think I just had resigned to, at this point, I was resigned to it always being that way. So then why would I stay, right? Well, I was trapped. I mean, I was a stay-at-home mom. I had no income of my own. I didn't know anybody in these places. We only lived in them roughly 6 months. And my family was back home in Iowa, and we are in Baltimore. I felt like I couldn't go anywhere, even if I wanted to. And at this point, I still really didn't want to. I still really loved him. I desperately wanted him to love me. I wanted to be good enough. I felt like there was still some hope, because, this was going to be the last step. He was going to get a master's degree, and financial security was on the horizon. And, for any marriage, really, money fighting is one of the biggest stressors and can cause divorce all on its own. So in my head, I was thinking okay, well, if we solve that, then everything else has the potential to fall into place. But I also knew internally that I was cracking under the pressure. And so while he was using networking as an excuse to go party with his friends and not come home and come home drunk and drink at home and all this other stuff, I kind of decided to scale back on some of the things that I did that I felt he could handle. And I shifted my focus to myself and my kids, who were at the time 6 months and 2.5 years old. And I decided to get back to one thing that I loved, which was volleyball. I played volleyball in college. I was a collegiate athlete, and I loved it. I still play. The last team that I just had shoulder surgery not long ago to fix my shoulder so that I could keep playing And I have been playing since I was 13 years old. And I decided to launch my cake business. My mom made cakes, for really elaborate cakes for us growing up. And that was something that I wanted to do, to see if I could do. And within 6 months, I had a full clientele. Like, I was doing a cake a week. I was good at it. And I loved it.
And to quickly distract from the point, like, Alisha is seriously a cake making badass. Like, Alisha is not just like, oh, I'm going to bake a cake and it's going to have some frosting and it's going to be cool. No, like that totally out there shit that gets shared around Facebook and all. Like, that's the kind of cakes that you do. And you're really, really damn good at it. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. I actually just last year, I felt like I had arrived because I had a cake come back to me. If that makes sense. Like, it made the internet rounds and came back to me.
That's awesome.
It was, if you ever make it back to my page, it's the Octonauts cake that I designed for my son's like 5th birthday or something. It just felt like really validating, because at this time in our relationship, when I shifted my focus from him, our relationship went to an immediate decline.
You were focusing more of your energy on yourself instead of him. And obviously, as a narcissist, that's not a thing that can be abided.
That cannot be abided. And it was really validating, because he told me it was just a stupid hobby. And then he backtracked and said, well, hobby is it's just the business term that we use for like a business that isn't blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, I know what you meant. So but our relationship is in a free fall. I had completed my deconversion because I stupidly decided to read the Bible. And I got to about 2 Kings. And, mind you, I've got this adorable, bubbly little blonde 6-month-old on my lap. And I get to 2 Kings where they're murdering babies. And I'm like, no, I can't do this anymore. I can't believe in this anymore. As Matt Dillahunty likes to say, I felt like I was better than that God. I came to him and I told him. It was actually a sad thing for me, because I understood that I was risking a lot, even in my own situation, especially in my own situation. I was risking a lot by being honest about this. I asked him to respect my privacy and to not tell his family, because I was afraid that all of those stories that I read of families just dropping them like hot ash when they found out that they were atheists would happen to me. And that happened to me. His mom, not so much, but especially at least, they were just really disrespectful to me. So, when you leave religion, as most of us probably listening to this have, some of us need to just be like, woohoo, I've got Sunday. I'm sleeping in. But because I was alone and I was in an abusive relationship, I needed a replacement for that scaffolding, that support structure. And so I went to the Baltimore Ethical Society, and I met tons of people there, secular humanists, the ethics people, ethical society people, atheists for sure, secular Jews, and they were amazing. And so I started to ask, I told him, I said, I want every other Sunday. And at first he actually refused, and
so you're talking about like splitting up the kids. So he takes them to church, and then you take the kids to the
next Sunday. I would take them to the Ethical Society. Okay. And he was just furious. He went into a narcissistic rage over this, and actually carried my screaming, fighting, and terrified toddler to the car and forcibly strapped him in. And I had taught my children that if somebody is taking you to fight, I taught them to fight, because I lived in Baltimore and I didn't want somebody to pluck them from the sidewalk next to me and then to just kind of go with it. So I told them that they should fight back. And it was heartbreaking to watch my 2.5-year-old fight back against his dad. I took him out of the seat and I hugged him until he left. And it just broke my heart to watch that happen. But eventually he did give in. I think because he figured out that this wasn't a way he couldn't win. If I was going to physically hold my toddler, he would have to hit me again in order to get this child away from me. And so he gave in, and we did the every other weekend for a really long time. And I instituted something that my children actually still love, Science Sunday. I got online and I found all kinds of like just at-home science experiments, and went on Amazon and found all those, box sets of chemistry sets and stuff so that we could play. We've made volcanoes, we've done the color change things, we've done all of it. We've done all of it, and they love it. Also at this time, because I was being treated so poorly, I began to wake up and go to sleep every day wanting to die. And I think the only reason I didn't was because of my children. I remember wishing that a car would just cross the center line, or that, just something would happen, or I wouldn't wake up from my sleep. Because I was being, now I wasn't even just being subconsciously oppressed, but I was being disrespected to my face. And I didn't have a way out of it. I didn't see a way out of it. So I went to the doctor and admitted all of this, terrified that they were going to take my children, but terrified that I was going to take myself from them if I didn't. So I began antidepressants, and I actually took them in secret for over a year, which tells you how much he paid attention to me. He didn't know that I took a pill every day for a year. He didn't care. It didn't affect him. So not something that he would pay attention to. In June, he finished that graduate program. He actually graduated one of the top in his class and got one of the most sought after, lucrative, mid-level director positions at a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation.
And this is June of 2014, right?
June of 2014. Okay. Y'all, we made it.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. I remember falling to my knees, crying. We made it. We went through all of this stuff. We are still together. Our children are healthy. We made it. We are secure. We can catch up on bills. We can do all this other stuff. And we had the salary that we had, there was no way, we wouldn't have to worry about anything. Budgeting loosely, maybe. This felt like the climax of the movie. This is what we had been working for. This is what I had hung all of my hope on, was the promise of getting here, to have a job with this much flexibility, where he was in control of himself and his schedule and all of that, and with all the resources that we would need to finally buy a home and plant roots and be in one spot. And he promised that this is where we should have had enough mental and actual time to spend with our children, to help around the house, to cook together as a family, to go places on vacation together as a family, or even just as us as a couple. We arrived. This is where it's supposed to get good. And we made a plan that we were going to, continue what we were doing. I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I would either attend school to finish the degree that I had, or a different one, or just find a job and begin working in 2017 based on my veteran status and the fact that, I had a degree and all this other stuff, and ran my own business against his will. But I still run my own business. It's still going today. In 2017, when the youngest went to school, I was going to supplement our income. Then for sure, we were going to, we made it, right? Instead, he proceeded to overspend. I mean, we had a lot of money and he was overspending it. Our debt was increasing, not decreasing. He picked up golf, which anybody who plays golf will tell you that's a really expensive hobby. He also picked up rugby, which I thought would be a good thing because it's controlled violence. All of that rage and anger that he had inside of him, that I could see that he was always penting up. Hopefully he could let it out on people that were like, yeah, bro, hit me. But he increased his alcohol consumption. He was going through bottles of gin a week, at least 2. He was going out drinking with his friends all the time, because anybody who knows rugby knows that sort of part and parcel with it is drink ups and that kind of stuff. Despite the fact that he only put like $500 in my account every month, he still blamed me for all of our financial issues, all of them. I was still playing volleyball. And he accused me of being selfish because I was doing that and still my cake business, and demanded that I should drop tournaments and orders if he decided, even if last minute he decided that, it would be too much of a burden on him to do that. I refused because I thought that was ridiculous. Like, anybody with an MBA should know that that's a great way to kill your business if that's what you want. But I didn't want to. I actually enjoyed this, and I wanted people to keep ordering from me. So I refused. And our relationship continued to go into a free fall. And so he decided that we were going to go see a psychologist, because I refused to see pastors anymore. I was not religious. I wasn't buying their garbage. And none of them helped. Not one of those pastors actually did anything to change the course of our relationship. He paid a lot of money, and he still went in there and, fully believing that he was not at fault, not at as much fault as I was, that this was my fault, that I wasn't doing it right. And he couldn't be expected to do anything because, I was antagonistic, or I was hurting him, or not doing what I was supposed to do, or not doing whatever. And, and the big thing for him was we had no sex life whatsoever. At this point, it was non-existent. I didn't want to be touched by him, by anybody else, by me. I thought I was asexual because I just had no attraction for anybody. I had no libido, no love for this man, or attraction, or even respect. I was completely shut down. But when she appropriately called him out on his inappropriate behavior and for being disrespectful, he dropped her instantly, because the one thing they can't do is face their consequences. They can't face the actual things that, what's the word I'm looking for?
They can't take responsibility.
They cannot face the responsibility of what they're supposed to do. And so he just walked out to the car and threw a tantrum and refused to come back in. Wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't tell her why, wouldn't tell me why, just said, I'm not coming back and we're leaving.
That was something that was done to me. My mom took me into counseling and was like, okay, tell Ari what's wrong with them. Of course, not using those words or pronouns, but whatever.
Fix them.
But then, the minute that the counselor is like, hey, you're not parenting the way that you should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Then she's like, oh, we don't need to do that anymore. We don't. That's not going to work for us. Yeah. They're
not. Yeah. And it's interesting how very quickly the blame shifts to the counselor, or in this place, the psychologist. This is sort of this lady's job, and she'd been doing it for 30 years, which is why he went to her. But two or three sessions in, suddenly she's incompetent. All because she called him on something. One thing. It was just one thing. He's the type of person that works out too far, and he gets, his body physically hurts because he pushes himself too hard. I did sports medicine in college, and I was one of the top of my class in medic school. I knew he was getting, he was breaking down his muscles too much and not giving them enough rest, which is why he was always sore. And I would try to tell him that, and he just wouldn't listen. And I remember she asked me, she goes, after you've gone rounds and rounds and rounds, what do you do? And I said, I give up. What can I do? And he was like, that's how I know you don't care about me.
Wow.
And she said, no, that's actually not true. And that's when he got up and walked out. Just the audacity. I think at this point, my antidepressant meds were tripled because I was not coping. I was not coping at all. I was losing weight. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I was starting to get anxiety. I had my first panic attack in the middle of the night. I woke up from a dead sleep, y'all, with a panic attack. And I thought I was dying. I'd never had one before. And I don't know what triggered it, because I was dead asleep. I don't know if it was a dream or if it was just just an unfortunate collision of chemicals. But I woke up from a dead sleep, and I actually had thought that there must have been a sound in the house. Somebody must be breaking in. Otherwise, why would I be having this reaction? So I get up and I check the whole house, and the whole house is silent. And I have a Fitbit. My heart rate's at 140. And I don't know why. I thought I was dying. And I went to the doctor, and she said, you had a panic attack. And so she gave me Ativan. And I was like, oh, I think that to me was, I'm a pretty endurant person. But when my body started to fail, was for me the sign that I needed to consider leaving for my own health. Because even if, like, my children deserve at least one functional parent. But he decides that he's going to plan a romantic European vacation through Paris and London to try and show me how much he loves me. You know, buy my love. And I couldn't say no. How am I supposed to say no? Even though I'm planning to leave. I'm talking with people. I'm trying to figure out how I can make this work. I already know at this point that he's hidden all the money. He put it in accounts that I couldn't touch and switched his electronic transfers over to an account that I couldn't touch, closed the line of credit that was in my name, and opened a different one. So I didn't have access to that either. Only thing I had access to was an empty shared bank account, the bank account that he put $500 into once a month, and a maxed out credit card. So I had to find another way to get out. And he wants to plan this vacation. So now I'm stuck on a metal tube over the ocean. And I was scared, but I had to go along with it. Like, I couldn't let him know that I was planning on leaving. And it was hell. It was pure bloody hell. The pictures don't tell the story, because I had to smile and put on a happy face. And there were things about it that were amazing. I got to walk through the Louvre, and I will do it again. That was an amazing experience, and being on the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe and Notre Dame. But I would really like to go again sometime without the looming threats over my head and this man-child begging me for sex the entire time, and complaining about his body hurting and just wanting to sleep, and complaining about how he just wants to go back and take a nap and sleep and watch TV in the hotel room. Like, why did we pay all this money to come to Paris for you to sleep and watch TV? Like, we could have totally done that at home.
Right.
For way cheaper. But I couldn't enjoy anything. He eventually went into a rage in the middle of London and abandoned me next to the castle, palace. I was walking and he just stopped, and I didn't realize that he had stopped. And by the time I realized that he wasn't there, and when later on he told me, he's like, I just let you go. I didn't want to be around you anymore. So I didn't have international minutes like he did, because he had his work phone, and he was going to a work thing in Germany the next following week. And so I was stranded in London with, I had to ask people how to get back to my hotel. So at least they spoke English. It was awful. So somewhere along there, we were actually having a good conversation. And I stupidly admitted to this man that I was heteroflexible. That, I prefer my relationships with men, but I'm sexually attracted to both men and women. And he surprisingly didn't really have a reaction. And I think it's because he had this dichotomy in his head of really kind of finding that, sexually appealing, but also finding to be sexually deviant because of his religious beliefs. So it really confused me at first, because he actually did not have a reaction to that. But looking back, that was a really dumb thing to admit in the middle of it. But I think it demonstrates that, through this entire process, you still are hoping against hope that something good can still come out of this, that it can be fixed, that it can be healed, that he can be that man that you married and not the one that he turned out to be. But I was beginning to realize that that man never existed. It was just a fairy tale, a lie to trap me. And so
well,
now
I think that, I mean, that sounds like that's another one of those moments where it's like there are good times peppered in throughout this. And you want so desperately for that to be your relationship. You focus so much on that and try really hard to forget the bad stuff. And I think, again, that's another, illustration of why it is so easy to fall into, staying in these relationships.
And so easy to not know that you know somebody that's in them, because you can look at the Facebook pictures and it tells an entirely different story.
Right.
You see smiling faces of two people having fun and their kids smiling and everybody looks happy. But you don't see the bruises on her arms because she's wearing long sleeve shirts on purpose to the beach. I think when the trip did not have the effect that he wanted it to have, he ramped up the emotional and psychological abuse. Like, he understood that financially I was trapped. So in order to get me to comply, mainly to have sex, because his pastor attempted to intervene, and he told me that I needed to stop taking my medication because my counselor only saw me as a bag of meat, as chemicals in motion, he said, and they don't actually care about me. They just want to push meds on me, which I knew wasn't true because they don't make money off the meds. It's not like pharmacy makes money off the meds, so it doesn't make sense for them to push the meds on me. And he told me that if I wasn't willing to act like a wife, that I couldn't expect my husband to act like a man and treat me with basic human decency. And what he meant by act like a wife was lay down and have sex with this man that I don't want to have sex with. I know that if this is what this pastor is willing to tell me, these disgusting messages, he's reinforcing them in my husband. So shortly after that, this whole time I had known that I needed surgery on my shoulder because I had torn my labrum playing volleyball. It's a very common volleyball injury. So all of that. But now I have pain in my neck and my shoulder because my trapezius and my rotator cuff were doing all the work to hold my shoulder up, and it was hurting my neck. But he refused to allow me to have that surgery because it wasn't a good time for him. So now I'm financially trapped. My medical needs are being withheld. So he threatens to stop paying my student loan, cut off my phone, and move himself and the children to another home without me and leave me homeless if I didn't have sex with him by September 25th, 2015, a specific date. So now on top of that, I'm being threatened with sexual assault, and my financial security is being threatened on top of that. My physical security. He's going to leave me homeless and take my children away from me. He starts to demand that we all attend his church together every Sunday, and claims that the previous agreement to take Sundays was a mistake, or to trade Sundays back and forth was a mistake. And he wasn't going to allow this evil to take hold in his house anymore. He wasn't going to let me deny my creator anymore. So I took the children. I would wake the children up before he got up on Sunday mornings, every other Sunday morning. And I would take them for a walk to the park or somewhere else before he woke up. And I would intentionally not come back until after lunch, so that they couldn't be physically dragged to church with him on my Sundays, because they liked spending Sundays with me. We couldn't do science Sundays anymore because we couldn't be home, but we went to museums and that kind of stuff. This whole time, the pastor's still intervening. He's telling me that I'm a disrespectful woman and trying to convince me that my atheism is what's making me sad, not my husband, and that if I just give up and accept Jesus into my heart, that everything will be 100% better. So now I feel like the sharks are like circling. I have, and his parents now, they're not supportive either, because now I've threatened the religious education of their grandchildren. So that's what I feel like caused them to back up. So now I don't have their support. His pastor is circling. He is circling, and he actually sues me. His wife, he sued me for every Sunday morning custody of the children. Y'all, my husband sued me for custody of our children. And it, like, I knew that just from my own experience, my mom had gone through a divorce with my dad, and there was some nasty custody battles. That wasn't a thing. Like, that the family courts are going to see that as a domestic issue, and they're not going to get involved. So I knew this was all smoke. It's still scary. I mean,
sure, yeah.
Being threatened with legal action is scary no matter what. And when I asked him if his lawyer actually thought he would win, he told me that his lawyer told him that he would end up divorced and he still wouldn't get every Sunday. And he proceeded anyway. This is when I knew that I had entered the third stage of a narcissistic abusive relationship, discard. I was being discarded because I would not comply. I couldn't. He couldn't manipulate me completely. I was putting up a boundary, and he legally couldn't fight back, and so he was losing.
Yeah, I mean, what ended up happening with that?
Oh, it got. I can't remember why, but it got dropped. I don't know if I agreed to let it happen. Because of the nature of my mental state, there are entire weeks that are missing. That are just gaps in my memory. And it's really scary because I've heard stories of people, oh, remember we had this conversation? I'm like, no, I don't know.
Right.
I don't remember anything before, during, or after that for like a week. I was sleeping a lot, like 14, 15, 16 hours a day because I was so exhausted. And, in this time, I think he was cracking mentally too, because as a narcissist, he couldn't get his supply. His supply was being cut off, and they can't handle that. And they'll go into what's called a narcissistic rage. And he was punching walls and making threats. He destroyed furniture. He was screaming in the faces of my children. And I remember saying one of the things that I actually now still repeat to my oldest child. I said it to my oldest child, but I repeat it to my children. And that's, if anybody ever has to convince you with fear, they have absolutely nothing true to tell you, ever. Because if they have evidence, they use it. And I think the example that I gave him was, if I want to demonstrate to you that gravity exists, I'm not going to use fear. I'm just going to throw your toy over the balcony. And we're going to watch it fall. And I've seen that, especially with my oldest, I think that message stuck. He doesn't really let people bully him around too much with that kind of stuff because he doesn't believe. And I've had to address with the school a couple of times with other kids, like kind of bullying him over that. But I think he just kind of lets it roll off his back because he understands that, they're using fear. And I think he somewhat understands that that's not, people who use fear aren't actually speaking in truth. But, this is what I was dealing with at the time, was somebody who was threatening me for sex, threatening my physical safety, threatening my financial safety, withholding medical treatment, threatening legal action. I have his pastor on my back. My support structures were being pulled away. I was isolated, and I was cracking mentally and physically. My body was giving up. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. So that's when I started to plan my escape. And I reached out to several people. Callie, you may not know, but this plan was actually in motion, was in the planning stages when I first met you. And so, August to September was time to go. I was just looking for the right time. He was berating me every night at bedtime until I would get up and leave. I couldn't sleep. He wouldn't let me sleep. And so I bunked the boys together in one room and moved out of the master bedroom into that spare room. Like I said, he's punching walls, destroying furniture, screaming at my children, spending most of his time inconsolably drunk, accused me of sleeping with everyone from the neighbor whose house had burnt down that day. to my best friend of 8 years, accused her, was making threats against her that he was going to sue her out of existence if she lied in front of a judge to protect me. Like just really, really crazy things. Finally, he has this trip that he has to take to Germany. It's a training. So not only is he going to be gone for a week, he's going to be in Germany, y'all. And so
hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus.
8.5 years. And finally, it's actually just past 8 years. And I can finally leave. So September 25th, 2015, he leaves for a week-long business trip to Germany. On the 26th, I call him or text him, I can't remember. But I tell him, I'm moving out while you're gone. On Monday, September 28th, I filed for divorce, support, and custody. And I got a lawyer that was recommended by the domestic violence shelter. He looked like a mob boss, and I couldn't have felt more safe. Like, he was like an Italian mobster looking guy, and he was visibly angry with what I was telling him I was going through. And he had promised to help me escape. He actually put me on like a payment plan and delayed the payment that he accepted. He took a lower rate because he was scared for me. And on September 29th, I escaped. And that's important because most people don't leave. Statistics show that most people don't leave. They can't leave, or they don't leave, or they won't leave, or they don't feel like they can live without this person. They start exhibiting what's called narcissistic abuse syndrome, where they're internalizing everything the narcissist says. And thankfully, I never got there. But I got out, and I signed a lease that day for my own apartment. And the reason that I was able to do it was creative overdrafting of our joint account. I saw some suspicious transfers in and out of this account to an account that I didn't recognize. And when I called the bank, I asked them what account is that? Because I don't know what it is. And they said, all I can tell you is it's a line of credit that's not your name. I was like, that's all I need to know. And so I wrote checks to intentionally overdraft that account, knowing it would trigger the line of credit to cover the overdraft. And then I would have access to funds, legal access to funds that I otherwise would not have access to. And I paid for the legal retainer and the deposit. Not everybody is going to have that opportunity. Not every abuser is going to make that mistake. I got lucky. And I was lucky enough to have people in my life that were willing to literally drop everything and physically come and pack and move all my things and put everything on the truck and move it off and reassemble all my furniture when I got here, because I was pretty much sitting on the floor cycling through panic attacks, just one after the other, after the other, after the other, in tears, crying because I understood that like my marriage was ending. I had put my heart and soul into like trying to make it work, and it was ending. But those people were Francine and Jason Brocious, Brian Fields, and Bill and Susie Robbins. Some of those names are probably very familiar.
Dear friends of ours, yeah.
Dropped everything and brought a Penske and rescued me. Literally rescued me. And other people like Karen Sloan and my mom and stepdad and other friends funded my You Caring fund without even knowing it was me. I shared it on my wall and people gave to it not knowing it was me, because I still didn't feel safe talking about it. But without that money that those people gave me, I couldn't have made ends meet until the state was able to execute the support order. And I don't know, so many of them like donated anonymously. I'll never be able to pay them back, ever, because I don't know who they are.
Well, I gotta imagine. God, I'm crying now too. I mean, you and I have a lot of mutual friends. I have to imagine there are probably a few of those folks listening, and I think, we'll get to where you are today. But I can promise you that to those folks, the fact that you're doing awesome and thriving now is thanks enough. I have to imagine. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and my best friends actually, like I have a couple of friends here and some longtime friends, Heather, Tristan, Lana, Branton, like literally day and night calling them, especially Branton, like middle of the night, 3 a.m. phone calls, just waking up in panic attacks and tears, and he would just sit with me in my pain. It takes a special human for that.
Yeah.
And like all of that support, without all of that support, I could not have gotten out and rescued myself and my kids. I just couldn't have. And so many people don't ever get lucky enough to have that in their life for whatever reason. And it was awesome. And here is where the nature of abuse gets really insidious. I still love this guy. I still wanted it to work. So we attempted reconciliation counseling. And he demanded a Christian counselor, and I demanded a secular one. So we compromised with this Christian counselor at a secular organization. There were a few upsides because she was a girl, and I think that she understood like the special vulnerability of being a stay-at-home mom that doesn't work, and how much effort it took for me to get out. But because she was in their, she ended up actually being in his congregation. And so I think she unknowingly empathized with him more than me because they shared the same faith in the same congregation. And she always seemed to be trying to balance something egregious that he did with something, just anything that I did. And I know it was to appease his narcissism so that he didn't feel like he was always taking full blame, so that she could try to appeal to that side of him to try to get him closer to empathy. But I think the thing that made me not trust her the most was that she refused to call abuse abuse. She called it not a trigger word, but she had a word for it, basically too harsh. It was too harsh. And it wouldn't get us any closer to reconciliation. But it was like, for me, I needed that validation. I knew that what I went through was abuse. Why don't you know that what I went through was abuse? And why don't you have the courage to tell this man that he did that? And she just wouldn't do it. And so after a traumatic Christmas together and him refusing outright to spend Valentine's Day with me, I was like, I cannot let this person keep hurting me anymore. He's not doing what I asked him to do to save our marriage, and he's actively doing things that continue to damage it. And he doesn't appear to have much remorse or any awareness of what he did to contribute to the situation. So after he refused the Valentine's Day date, because he said he'd be just I don't even know what this phrase means, but he said, it'd just be throwing good words after bad. And I was like, okay. At some point, I have to stop letting you hurt me, because I am at this point now that I'm out. I am letting you hurt me. And I asked him to sign the divorce papers, and I walked away. I got the divorce papers finalized May 28th, and I actually got them emailed to me at the Reason Rally.
That's incredible.
Needless to say, I partied a little hard that day.
Yeah.
I did end up going to see a psychiatrist because my panic attacks were not stopping. They were less, but they were not stopping. I was still having pretty regular panic attacks. And I think a lot of people don't understand, and PTSD, is what I ended up being diagnosed with. And that's where my panic attacks and stuff came from. And I actually went on Seth Andrews' show to talk about trigger warnings and PTSD and anxiety and depression because, I had all of it, like the temperature drop afterwards, the inability to think, the fight or flight. Well, for me, it was freeze. I froze. I literally in some ways. And like all of those things flashing back to feelings that I had of feeling unsafe and being afraid he was at my door. Every time my phone rang and it was him, like I would freak out and just lose it completely. And so I went to see a psychiatrist because like I said before, like my children deserve a functional mother. And so she reinforced the fact that I needed to stay on my meds, and started me on EMDR, which is rapid eye movement therapy. And it for whatever reason, it broke me out of it. And I don't think the mechanism was quite understood, and I know that it doesn't work for everybody, but it did work for me.
It's freaking magic, y'all. EMDR is magic.
And like I said, I know
don't take mental health advice from a podcast.
Don't take mental health advice from a podcast, but that is something that helped me. It really was a shockingly short amount of time that I had to do it. I had some really nasty emotions that came out of it, but it was almost kind of like if you would fast forward through a movie is what it kind of felt like. It was intense, but I was able to function in a shorter amount of time. Now, I refused to date for a while because, I did not feel like I had 100% of myself to give to the next person, whether they were healthy or not. I was not able to give a fair amount of myself to any relationship to make it work. I was also terrified that I would do this again. And so I wanted to know what it was that I was dealing with, what got me in the situation that I was in, so that I would know the signs to look for, the red flags, so that I would not go through this again. And that's where I came upon narcissistic abuse. And it's really, we talked about it through my story, but it's a special form of abuse where the abuser causes the victim to give up their wants, their needs, their feelings in order to serve the abuser's demands. And victims of this type of abuse often end up struggling with knowing what their healthy boundaries are and what healthy relationships look like. It's very premeditated. It is manipulative, subversive, and just really, it's evil. It's very, very hurtful. And like I said, if you go back through the story and listen, then you'll see how it all happens. And they're charming, they're on their best behavior. The whole idea is to make the victim feel like they're idolized, they're a prize. It's the best thing that's ever happened to them. This is a fairy tale. I found him. He's the one. But the narcissist will rush through that because it's difficult to do and give you a false impression of who they are. And so that they don't have to keep pretending, which is why he's currently engaged to his girlfriend of maybe a couple months. And so I'm scared for her.
Yeah.
But I know there's nothing I can really do. I can't meddle in his life. I can't help her make her decisions. But I do know she's younger. And I know that, she is way more religious than I am, which means that the option of divorce is not available.
Right. Unless
he cheats. And I know that these are things that I don't know for a fact that he's doing it intentionally, but I know that he's doing it subconsciously.
I was going to say, either way, it's very obviously a protection mechanism that he has available to him. And I'm sure on one level or another, he's aware.
Right. That it's easy to catch one and to charm one. And that's the whole point, is to catch him. So while he's doing that, I'm just trying to figure out, how do I not get into this situation again?
Right.
And it took a really long time for him to even detach to me. Even though the discard phase happened back then, it still takes a narcissistic abuser a really long time to detach themselves from you. You can't detach yourself from a narcissist. You have to get them to detach themselves from you.
Right.
And there are a couple of methods out there that I use. And if anybody's out there, this is the best one that I found. I tried a few. It's called the gray rock method, and you can look it up. But the point is to be as interesting as an old gray rock. Be unresponsive, boring, non-reactive, unhelpful. Without the adoration and the ability to be manipulated and the drama to feed off of, the narcissist will eventually get bored and move on. And that's what he did.
So talk to me about where you are today.
It took a while. Like I said, it took like 18 months for me to feel like I could, like I was healthy enough and could actually recognize. And I went on a few dates with guys and like, ooh, you know, you touch your nose, you're like, oh, no, bye. No, not this again. Because once you've seen it and you know what it looks like, you know, it's terrifying and you just run the other way. But I recently started dating a guy who is just completely different in every way. And I feel actually comfortable just sort of being supported and like a maybe not the ugly human being that my ex made me out to be. He makes me feel beautiful and special and like in a healthy way. And it's really nice to feel supported like that. And I'm off my medication completely. May have to take an Ativan after this. We'll see.
Sure.
There'll be some self-care for sure. But for the most part, I'm not on my antidepressants anymore. What I think one of the things that I didn't realize that I had the most was pent-up anger. Because you're being blamed for everything.
Sure. That's
dissipated. So as a byproduct of that, I yell at my kids less. I'm going to start working again in the fall. Everything in my cake business. I got my surgery. Like I said, I got my shoulder surgery so I can start playing volleyball again. I was cleared in April. Everything is looking up.
I love you, Alisha. I want you to know that.
I love you too.
Gosh, like, so, like, as a podcast host, I always feel like I have to have some kind of ending monologue to, like, wrap the story up and, like, put it all together or something like that. But, I got nothing. You are a beautiful human being, and I am so incredibly proud to have you in my life. And
I have a closing monologue.
Oh, please. You give the closing monologue. This is your show.
If you are in this situation, you are not alone. You may not be able to get out, and you may not have resources, and you may not have the luck that I had. Most people don't, but you're not alone. There are places on Facebook that you can get to where there are secular-minded support groups with resources in your area, and if not, they'll find them. And you can contact Callie, and I can put you in contact with those groups if you're in those situations, because it's not just marriages. Narcissistic abusers are also very commonly between parents and children, sometimes even friends. So if you find yourself, if any of this sounds familiar, I encourage you to read up on what it is and how to help yourself, and to reach out to your local domestic violence shelter. Please be honest with your friends, because you never know where your support and your help can come from. And feel free to reach out to the show if you need resources. We'll try to find them for you.
That's all I got.
I love you. Thank you for letting me tell my story for the first time.
Thank you for trusting us with it. That's a really big deal to me. That's a responsibility that I take very seriously, and I am incredibly grateful to you for opening up to us and to the show and to the audience here. And I'm sure there are probably quite a few people who have been touched by your story. So thank you just by sharing. I know, I have to imagine you've done something good for yourself here, and kind of laying it all out. I'm sure, at least on some level it's got to be cathartic, and you've also done good, because I promise there are people who have been touched listening to this show and listening to your story, who have realized things about themselves, realized things about their relationships, maybe some positions that their friends are in, something along those lines. So I know none of this is easy, and I'm sure it wasn't easy telling your story either. So as you take care of yourself, as you decompress and sort of unwind, please just reflect on the fact that you've done an amazing thing here, and thank you.
Thank you.
Gonna dispense with the usual promo stuff in the outro.
Sounds good to me.
Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.